hopefully you'll get a little information out of this. My name is Jeremy Ross. I'm a soybean agronomist, University of Arkansas Systems Division of Ag. Talk today a little bit some of the data I've been working on for the last 3 years. Really going to focus on kind of 15 data. I just haven't had a chance to sit down and pull the 3 years worth of data together. But the trends I want to talk about today, we've seen the same trends 2013, 2014, 2015. And so hopefully, in the next few months, once the meeting season kind of dies down, I can get back in the office and start doing some computer work. But, with the pigweed issue that we're having, and especially, with the onset of PPO resistance, especially in Arkansas, we're going to have to look at other things other than, chemical herbicides to try to combat some of these, problematic weed issues. And so with me being an agronomist, I wanted to kind of look at some of those things. And so again, this is a kind of a study that, me and Dr. Bob Scott have been looking at for the last couple of years. You can see the resistance issue, especially with glyphosate, the weeds in Arkansas that we've had problems, the years that they were identified. Water hemp was the last one, 2014, being glyphosate resistant. This is a shot. Everybody's kind of probably seen pictures like this. This was actually not too far across the river in St. Francis County, Arkansas, back when pigweed started to become an issue. And this farmer, he pretty much had to quit because he was tearing up his combine and costing too much money with having to repair his combine, trying to run through this soybean field with all these pigweed issues. And you can see he was on very wide rows and just wasn't having very good luck with the chemicals at that time. So management techniques, again, everybody kind of knows this. Crop rotation, if you've listened to some of Bob Scott's talks this winter, his number one bullet point on things to help combat glyphosate resistant pigweeds is rotation. Corn, rice, something where we can get a little bit different chemistry to control these weeds. I mentioned herbicide rotation. This is probably becoming a harder and harder problem because, especially with the PPO resistant issues that was discovered last year, herbicide rotation within the soybean crop is very limited. You're looking at, Roundup's not going to work, and your PPO herbicides aren't going to work. The ones we've been relying on, the last several years, you're really left with Liberty Link and Metribuzin and Dual. That's really the three that were left. And with three chemistries to control pigweeds, you're not going to be able to rotate those chemistries. Herbicide combinations, we're still stressing that, trying to get those residuals out, trying to mix up that tank mix, trying to get as many modes of action out. Tillage, we really don't do a whole lot of tillage anymore. A lot of people kind of, cultivators and things like that have been sitting in the weeds. I've probably seen more cultivators pulled out of the weed piles and scrap piles in the last couple of years just because of some of the pigweed issues. But, with this being the conservation tillage meeting, tillage is probably the worst word you can say at a meeting like this. But in some situations, tillage is probably going to be the only option you're going to have, especially if some of these other chemistries quit working. So to kind of set up how we got started on this, Bob was working with a grower in 2012. This is looking at narrow row spacings versus wide row spacings. The wide was on 30-inch rows. The narrow was a 7.5-inch drill. Bob always said the reason we went with those two different row spacings is because that's what the equipment we had at the time. And so that was kind of how we got started looking at this. This was, back in the day, looking at when Liberty Link first kind of came on the market, looking at, some of the different combinations. If we look at just, a pre-emerge alone, and this is a percent control of pigweeds into plots. With those narrow rows, we're getting, about twice it's not much, but, over that wide row with just a single pre-plant application of a herbicide, we're getting over double, control of the pigweeds. If you start adding, different combinations of the different products, of course, this is the Cadillac treatment in the Liberty Link system, looking at prefix followed by 2 shots of Liberty in season. Narrow rows, we're up there almost, 97, 98% control of the pig weeds. On that wider rows, we're losing about 10 to 12, 15% of that control. And so kind of based off of this data, we kind of started looking at this big study. And when we started developing this, Bob looked at it, after I kind of developed the study, he said, man, that is one big test. And I said, yes, it is. And so this is it's kind of been known as the big test for the last three years. We conducted this at the Newport station. If anybody's familiar with that station, heavy pigweed pressure. John, you got a question? Oh, you are familiar with it, aren't you? But the Newport Research Station, again, heavy pigweed pressure. A little bit late planting. Newport for the last 3 years has just been kind of in that hotbed of untimely rainfalls. 2013, 2014, and especially 2015, tremendous amounts of rain. We really just couldn't get in there, in that May planting date that I really would like to have gotten into, but, we're kind of looking at, late June to, somewhat early June planting date. Looked at group 4s, group 5s. Within each of those maturity groups, we tried to select a variety. One we considered a more upright plant architecture, kind of a stovepipe plant structure, versus one that the companies consider more bushy, thinking that maybe this one would give a little bit better yield, perform a little bit better on the narrow rows, the wide one would look a little bit better on the wider rows, the bushy one. 3 seeding rates, we looked at what at the time we considered a suboptimal planting rate. 150 when we first started this, that was kind of our target seeding rate for Arkansas in 2013. And then we wanted to look at it, something a little bit higher. So we looked at 190,000 seeding rate. And then we had 3 row spacings, 15s, 30s, and 36s. This is kind of an in-season shot. So with the treatments, along with, the different treatments that I just mentioned, we also kind of had paired plots. And so we had plots that we kind of, I guess the entire test kind of had a based application of a pre-emerge herbicide. And then some plots we just kind of let the weeds go the rest of the season. With that pre-emerge herbicide, we were getting 85, 90% control. But, at 90% control, you got 10% of the weeds coming up, you just kind of let them go for the rest of the season. They're going to get pretty big, and so this is about 10% control early in the season, but throughout the season you're going to get more plants emerging. You're going to have some pretty good weed pressure. Right next to it, we kept these our weed-free checks, and that reason we wanted to do that is see what the maximum yield would be in the absence of any weed pressure. And so we use chemical products during the season to help combat the weeds, and also sent my crew out about once a week during the season to pull any kind of pig weeds or anything that was coming up. And so again, this kind of gives you an indication about mid-season of how weedy or how much weed pressure we had in the plots compared to the untreated check. Again, mid-season, full canopy closure with our 15-inch row spacings, 30-inch, it's almost considered, full canopy. 36-inch, there is a little bit of gap there. It's almost complete canopy coverage, but again, you're still getting some light interceptions and things like that down within that canopy. As I mentioned, we looked at this for the last 3 years. I haven't had a chance to average all the data together, but the trends are real similar, each individual year. 2013, we had really good pigweed pressure and really saw some really good results similar to 2015, where we had our weedy checks versus our weed-free checks. We had some pretty good gaps. The weed pressure plots were quite a bit less yielding. 2014, we had really good conditions when we put out a pre-emerge, and we had really good control of our pigweeds. And then it turned out fairly dry during the season, and we just didn't have the weed pressure in 2014 that we did in 13 and 15. So I think that may askew the data a little bit for that 1 year. After I kind of look at the averages, I'm going to kind of look and see if we need to do an additional year to kind of even some stuff out. But if we look at the 2015 yields, this is our Wits by variety at the LSD of 0.1. Anything with the same letter is not statistically different, and so on yields. And so our blue bars are 15-inch row spacings, 30s are red bars, 36 is green. These two groups of bars are where we had our weed pressure. These two are where we had our weed-free check. I think the yields are a little bit lower this year, again, because we were late getting planted and it kind of turned off hot and dry in July and August. So I think the yields are affected a little bit. But again, we're seeing the similar trends that, of course, where we had our pigweed pressure, yields are going to be reduced. Where we, eliminate the pigweed pressure, all the yields seem to increase somewhat. 15's really dramatically increased. If you look at the 2013-2014 data, the 15-inch row spacing on the weedy plots was quite a bit better than it was in 2015. But again, similar trend. 15-inch row spacing seems to be giving us our best kind of control of pigweeds throughout the season. If we look at our Group 5 test, similar situation, slides set up the same. Our erect versus bushy plant architecture on our weedy checks, and then our weed-free checks. Again, those 15-inch row spacings tend to be giving us significant increase in yields over our wider rows. The last couple of years, the 30s and 36s have kind of been neck and neck, but in 2015, we did actually see a stair step down in yield versus the 30s and 36s. Again, we looked at seeding rates. Want to kind of look at the widths by seeding rates, and this is all the seeding rate combinations averaged across the Group 4 test. Again, 15s, 30s, 36s. A little bit different than we've seen the last 2 years. If you've probably seen me talk about this in the past, we really haven't seen much of a difference in the seeding rates between the individual row spacings. And so in the past, 2013, 2014, it didn't matter if you planted 110,000, 150,000, or 190,000 seeding rate. The yields were pretty flat, when you looked at the 15-inch versus, the 30-inch and the 36, for the individual row spacings. We did have a little dip in the 15s this past year with the 15-inch row spacing on 110,000, but again, that 150, 190,000, not statistically different. Again, but we're seeing kind of flat trends, with the 30s and 36s. And this kind of goes back to what, some of the other research I've been looking at seeding rates. For Arkansas, we're recommending kind of a range on seeding rates. So from the United Soybean Board grant that I've worked on a couple of years ago, 110,000 seed per acre. And again, this is under ideal conditions. If you're going extremely early or extremely late, you may need to bump this up, 10 to 15%. 110,000 seed per acre is going to give you 95% maximum yield on that crop. 150,000 plants or seed per acre is going to give you 99% maximum return, and 185,000 is going to give you 100% maximum return. If you plant anything past that 185,000 seed per acre, you're actually going to probably see a detriment in your yield, because you're going to start to get a lot more lodging, a lot more competition within the rows. Some of those plants are going to act more like a weed, and they, not put on any pods. So 150,000 is 95 or 99%. When we look at our Group 5s, pretty similar. We did get a spike in that higher seeding rate on our 15-inch row spacings. I'm still trying to analyze the data and try to come up with the reason why we had such a higher spike in the 15-inch at the 190,000 last year. But again, we're seeing that similar trend. Really not seeing much of a difference between the 150 to 110,000 to 190,000 seed per acre. Of course, everybody gives a presentation. They always want that last slide to kind of be your take-home message. So I think, everybody's seen row spacing data, and we've talked about, trying to narrow up row spacings. But I think when we're talking about pigweeds, this is probably the biggest take-home message we need to look at. And so we just averaged the number of pigweeds. So we just went out and kind of did estimates, on how much pigweed pressure at the end of the season after harvest we had in the individual plots, and then average it across the 3 different row spacings. And so if you look at our 15-inch row spacing, we were averaging somewhere around 15 to 16 pigweed plants. And this is in our weedy test. I mean, our weed-free, we didn't have any escape. So this is just in our weedy plots. Somewhere around 15 to 16 plants at the end of the year, with our 15-inch row spacing. When we looked at our 30s, that jumped up to somewhere under, 38, 39 seed per plot. And then when we looked at our 38 6-inch, that was up there around 80 plants per plot. And so this kind of shows you, if you didn't really have a very good weed control throughout the season, even if you just had narrow row spacings versus wide row spacings, the number of plants or weeds you're going to have at the end of the season are going to be dramatically reduced with that narrow row spacing. And so again, if you had overlaid, a good residual program and then some good post applications throughout the season, I imagine these numbers would have been, significantly reduced. But it's a lot easier to try to control, 15 to 16 plants versus 80 plants, because we all know you're going to have some escapes and you're going to have some issues and coverage issues and things like that. And so this is, kind of what I really wanted to kind of focus on is, we're going to have to look at other things other than our chemistries to try to help combat some of these issues. And especially with the resistance issues with some of these other products that we're seeing, we may need to kind of think a little bit different, change up our mindset on looking at some of these agricultural practices. So some of the conclusions we've seen over the last 3 years, not much difference in the architecture. We were assuming that we were going to see an advantage with the more erect plant architecture, probably in the narrow rows than we were with the wider rows, and we just really didn't see that. It could be that we just didn't pick the right varieties. It's really hard to look at company data and try to get those varieties, and you may get a variety, you think it's, not very bushy, but then when you actually get it planted, and if you get it planted at a different time, it's going to probably act a little bit different. So, this wasn't as clear cut as we thought it was going to be when we first started. 3-year trends indicate that 15-inch row spacing are going to have higher yields. We indicated that 2013, 2014. 2015, there was some indication of that, but not as clear cut as it was the first 2 years. 3-year trends indicated increasing seeding rate really didn't increase your yields much. Again, the 13-14 data showed that a little bit stronger than the 15 data. And then again, narrowing up our row spacings will help with resistant issues. You're going to reduce that, seed bank and competition. Really the main thing in that, you're going to get quicker canopy closure with these narrow rows than you are with these wide rows. And so therefore you're going to shade out the weed competition and help yourself along the way, and especially try to help out some of these your weed chemicals, in the future. So, any questions, comments, concerns?
Back on the slide where it said that it was in the narrow rows, it was like 15 or 16.
That one?
Yeah. How big is the plot again?
We went out and measured a square meter in each of the plots.
Okay. All right.
So this is an estimate of you take that meter square and then extrapolate it out. So, your 15-inch row spacing is going to be smaller on actual size versus your 30s and 36s, but this is based on, actual looking at a square meter and then extrapolating that. Next question.
That 150,000 seeding rate, is that final span or is that?
No, that's viable seed, so you need to adjust that on germ. So if you've got a 90% germ, you need to increase that 10%.
You're talking about 150,000 final
Seed,
span.
well, seed, not stand, because this is actual seeds that you plant, viable seed that you actually plant. Because I've got that number, I've got those numbers on, the stand counts, but your spring stand counts could change, and it could be a little bit different than your stand counts at harvest. And so we take early season stand counts, and then we take stand counts at harvest. I've got those numbers, I just don't have them in this talk. But when we're talking about seeding rates, that's 110,000 seed per acre, 150,000 seed per acre, and 185,000 seed per acre. And you're going to have, it's going to reduce some, you're looking at maybe 25% reduction. So in that 110,000, you're going to have a final plant stand somewhere around 80,000, 90,000 in that range, somewhere in that range. And then 150 is going to be in that 110, 150, 120,000, 185,000 is going to be 160, 170, something like that.
You see any difference in your weed pressure with the different seed rates?
No, we didn't see any, there was no interaction. You know, it was mainly on that row spacing, and you got quicker canopy closure. We looked at that and we just didn't see any kind of, there wasn't any interaction with the seeding rates. Any other questions? Appreciate the opportunity.
What's the
Oh,
next?
Brad.